My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 66 years old. The world thinks it knows what loss feels like, but they have never stood at a grave while their phone vibrated with a message from the man they were burying. Ernest was the love of my life. For 42 years, we were the kind of soulmates who didn't need words, just the sound of the porch swing and the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. We were poor, but our hearts were overflowing with a richness money could never buy. I remember the way he looked at me in my faded green dress, as if I were a queen, and he was my humble protector. We raised our sons Charles and Henry with every ounce of love we possessed. I worked until my fingers bled, and Ernest repaired bicycles until his back was permanently bent, all to give them a future we never had. But somewhere along the way, the boys we loved became strangers we didn't recognize. Charles, the eldest, grew a heart of stone and an appetite for gold, while Henry followed him like a shadow into the darkness. They started looking at our little house with pity, and then with greed. They didn't see a home filled with memories. They saw an obstacle to their inheritance. I tried to tell myself they were just busy building their lives in the city, but the calls grew shorter, and the visits felt like chores until that terrible Tuesday morning when the hospital called saying there had been an explosion at the shop. My world shattered into 1,000 pieces, and I found myself sitting in a waiting room with two sons whose eyes were dry and whose minds were already calculating the insurance payout. They told me it was an accident, but I felt the coldness in their touch as they tried to convince me to let him go. When Ernest took his last breath, I felt half of my soul vanish. But at the funeral, as the dirt hit the casket, my phone lit up with those words, "I am alive." That is not me in the casket. Do not trust our sons. The air left my lungs, and I realized the nightmare was only just beginning. I looked at my children standing there in their expensive suits pretending to grieve, and I saw the monsters I had unknowingly nurtured. I went to the bank and found the missing thousands. I went to the shop and found no signs of an explosion. I found a hidden letter from Ernest where he confessed his fears and his suspicions that our own blood was planning something dark. He had hired a private investigator named Stephen Callahan to protect me even when he couldn't protect himself. I learned the truth that my sons had poisoned their father with methanol for insurance money, and they were already preparing a second dose for me. I had to sit across the table from them and watch them offer me pastries and coffee, knowing every sip could be my last. I had to play the part of the grieving, fragile widow, while my heart was screaming for justice. The betrayal was a physical weight of poison that ran deeper than anything they had given Ernest. I realized then that family is not about the blood in your veins, but the love in your heart. And the men sitting in my kitchen were no longer my sons. They were predators waiting for me to fall. Justice is a cold dish when it involves your own flesh and blood, but I knew I couldn't let Ernest's memory be trampled by their greed. I met Stephen in a small cafe and heard the recordings that broke what was left of my heart. Hearing Charles plan my suicide to look like depression was a pain worse than death itself. He spoke of me as a burden to be cleared away, as if I were an old piece of furniture instead of the mother who had nursed him through every fever. I went to the police and laid out the truth like a shroud. Sergeant O'Connell looked at me with a pity that burned, but I stood tall because Ernest was standing right there beside me. In spirit, we watched the sun rise on the day the police swarmed their homes. I didn't answer their desperate calls as they realized the trap had closed. I watched them being led away in handcuffs, their faces pale, and their voices full of lies that no longer worked. The trial was a long walk through the valley of shadows. I had to testify against the boys I had once sung lullabies to. I had to listen to the recordings of their cruelty played for the whole world to hear. The jury saw the truth, that greed had hollowed them out until there was nothing left but malice. When the judge read the sentence of life without parole, I didn't feel a victory. I only felt a profound silence. The house felt empty, but for the first time it felt safe. I donated the blood money to a foundation for others who have been betrayed by those they love, because I wanted Ernest's name to stand for hope instead of tragedy. Charles couldn't live with his own reflection and took his life in a cell, while Henry lost his mind to the guilt and the ghosts that haunted him. I still go to the cemetery every Sunday with fresh flowers from the garden I planted in Ernest's old shop. I talk to him about the sun and the roses and the peace we finally found. I have learned that life is a series of choices, and even at 66 you can choose to be a warrior. I see the innocent faces of my little boys in old photographs, and I cry for the children who are gone, but I do not cry for the men they became. I am Margot Hayes, and I am a survivor of a love that was pure and a betrayal that was absolute. The truth is a hard path, but it is the only one that leads home. And as I sit on my porch today watching the sunset, I know Ernest is proud of the woman who didn't let the darkness win. We are more than our tragedies, and we are more than our blood. We are the stories we leave behind, and mine is one of a love that refused to die and a justice that finally brought peace to a weary heart. The seasons changed, and the snow began to blanket the garden where Ernest and I used to dream of a quiet old age. But peace is a strange guest. It arrives only when you have finished fighting the ghosts of your past. I spent many months wandering through the rooms of this house, listening to the silence that was once filled with the laughter of two little boys and the heavy boots of a hard-working man. People in town look at me with a mixture of awe and sadness, as if I am a living monument to a tragedy they can barely comprehend. But I have stopped seeing myself as a victim of my sons and started seeing myself as the guardian of our legacy. I found a box of old letters under the floorboards in the attic, letters that Ernest had written to me when he was away working in the city. During our first year of marriage, his words were full of a raw hope and a promise that no matter how hard life became, we would always have each other. Reading those words made me realize that our love was the only thing the boys could never steal. They took the money, they took the peace, and they tried to take my life, but they could never touch the soul of what Ernest and I built together. I decided to open the doors of our home to those who had nowhere else to go. I turned the old bicycle shop into a sanctuary for women who have known the cold touch of betrayal and the fear of the dark. We sit together and share stories, and in their eyes I see the same flicker of strength that kept me breathing when the world felt like it was ending. I tell them that the heart is a resilient thing, and that even when it is shattered, it can be glued back together with a gold of truth. Henry sent me a letter from the prison last month begging for forgiveness. I am not yet ready to give. I read his words and felt a distant ache, but the cord that tied us together has been cut by his own hand. I have learned that forgiveness is not about letting someone back into your life. It is about letting go of the heavy stone you have been carrying in your chest. I wrote back a single sentence telling him to find peace within himself, because the mother he knew died the day he chose greed over blood. As I sit here now with a fire crackling in the hearth and the scent of pine needles in the air, I feel a strange sense of completeness. The journey has been long, and the price was higher than I ever imagined, but I am still standing. I am the keeper of the flame and the narrator of a story that didn't end in the darkness of a grave. I look at the empty chair across from me, and I don't see an absence. I see a presence, a love that transcends the physical world and whispers to me in the wind that everything is as it should be. The shadows have retreated, and the light of the truth is the only thing that remains. I am Margot Hayes, and I have finally found my way home through the storm and into the quiet embrace of a life well lived and a love that will echo through eternity. Time has a way of blurring the edges of pain, leaving behind only the crystal clarity of the lessons we learned under fire. I am older now, and my hands tremble when I pour my tea, but my spirit has never been more certain of its place in this vast universe. I often walk down to the edge of the lake where Ernest and I used to sit when the world felt too heavy, and I realize that the water is still moving just as life continues despite the holes left in our hearts. I look at the reflection in the ripples, and I see a woman who survived the unthinkable, not because she was strong, but because she refused to let the darkness define her beauty. I have spent these final years teaching the young ones in the village that the greatest wealth you will ever possess is the integrity of your own soul and the loyalty of those you keep close. I tell them the story of a man who loved so deeply he reached out from beyond the veil to save his wife, and I see the hope ignite in their eyes like tiny stars. The house that was once a prison of grief has become a cathedral of light, where the walls are covered in paintings of sunrises instead of the shadows of the past. I sometimes wonder what life would have been like if my sons had chosen a different path, if they had valued the calloused hands of their father over the cold glitter of coins. But those thoughts are like dry leaves in the wind, and I let them blow away, because dwelling on the what-ifs is a slow poison. I choose to remember the way Charles laughed at the butterflies when he was 4, and the way Henry used to hide behind my apron when the thunder rolled. I forgive the children they were while holding the men they became accountable For their choices, I have made peace with the silence of the cemetery, because I know now that Ernest isn't under that stone, he is in the warmth of the sun on my face, and the strength in my stride as I walk back up the hill. The legacy of our love has outlived the greed of our enemies, and that is the ultimate victory. I have written my final will and testament, and this time it is a document of love, leaving everything to the sanctuary, so that the broken may always find a place to mend. I am ready now for whatever comes next, because I have finished my work and I have told my truth. The sun is dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, and I can almost hear the sound of the porch swing creaking in the breeze, inviting me to sit and rest a while longer. The story of Margot Hayes is not a tragedy, it is a testament to the power of the human heart to endure, to fight, and to eventually find the stillness it deserves. I close my eyes and feel the presence of the man who started this journey with me, and I know that the next time I open them we will be walking through a garden where the flowers never fade and the shadows never fall. I am going home, not to a house of brick and stone, but to the arms of the one who knew my heart before I even spoke, and in that thought there is a peace that surpasses all understanding, and a love that has finally found its eternal shore. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe to Liberty Legends for more. Hit that like button to support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.